You wake up in complete darkness. Not the darkness of your bedroom at night, but a darkness so thick you wonder if you still have eyes. You try to move, but there's nothing around you. No floor, no walls, no air to breathe. But somehow, you're still thinking. And then you remember. The car crash. The pain. The moment everything went black. You're dead. My name was David Chun. When I was alive, I thought death would be like going to sleep forever, peaceful and quiet. I was wrong. Very, very wrong. Being dead isn't peaceful. It's heavy. Not heavy like carrying something with your hands. I don't have hands anymore. It's heavy like all the memories of your life are sitting on top of what's left of you. I found myself floating in nothing. Complete darkness everywhere. But I wasn't alone. I could feel other people around me, even though I couldn't see them. We were all floating in our own little spaces, close to each other but unable to touch or really talk. Time felt weird here. Sometimes 1 second felt like it lasted for years. Other times, what felt like 100 years passed in a blink. There was no day or night, no way to know how long anything took. Just existing. The scary part wasn't the darkness. The scary part was knowing this would never end. Not in a long time. Not in a very long time. Never. Forever and ever. With no way out. I wasn't the only confused person here. Sometimes I could feel others near me, like voices whispering in the dark. There was Margaret. She was 93 when she died, surrounded by her family. She thought she would see her dead husband again, maybe go to heaven like she believed her whole life. Instead, she was here, remembering every happy and sad moment from her long life, understanding now that every good thing always had to end. Then there was Jake. He was only 17 when his motorcycle crashed. He was angry about dying so young. He kept getting mad, then sad, then mad again. How could anyone be okay with this? How could the world be so unfair that you keep thinking after you die, even when there's no point? And Sarah was here too. She used to be a teacher who studied death and what happens after. She spent her whole life thinking and writing about what death might be like. Now she was laughing, but not in a happy way. All her smart ideas about death, and she never imagined anything like this. We found ways to share our thoughts with each other, though it wasn't like talking. It was more like our minds touched each other, and we could feel what the others were thinking. But this made us feel even more alone, because we realized how different and separate we all really were. When you're alive, you forget most things. You forget boring days, small hurts, and everyday mistakes. Your brain helps you by not remembering everything, so you can keep living without being crushed by all your memories. Here, there was no such help. I remembered everything, every mean thing I said as a kid. Every time I walked past a homeless person and didn't help. Every happy moment I didn't appreciate. Every kiss, every heartbreak, every boring Sunday afternoon. It was all there, playing over and over in perfect detail. But it wasn't just my memories. Somehow, in this place, I started remembering other people's lives too. I remembered Sarah's first day as a teacher, how nervous and excited she was. I felt Margaret's sadness when her husband died. I experienced Jake's first kiss. We were all becoming mixed together, sharing each other's memories and feelings. And with that mixing came a terrible understanding. We weren't just stuck with our own forever. We were stuck with everyone's forever. Every person who ever died was here. Their memories and experiences were blending together like paint mixed with water. A mother's joy holding her baby mixed with a soldier's fear of dying alone. An old man's happiness feeding birds mixed with a lost child's terror in the woods. We were becoming everything and nothing at the same time. Every human experience squashed together into one overwhelming feeling that would last forever. Sarah had stopped her bitter laughing. In our endless time here, she began to understand something that scared what was left of her soul. We used to wonder if hell was fire or just being away from God, her thoughts whispered through the darkness. But we were wrong. Hell is thinking without having anything to do. It's being aware but not able to change anything. It's remembering everything but never being able to forget. She was right. When we were alive, thinking helped us survive. It helped us love, create, and find meaning in life. But here, thinking was just cruel, awareness for no reason, stretching forever with nothing to be aware of, except that we would never stop existing. We had become prisoners in our own minds, trapped by the very thing that made us human. Worse, we began to understand that this wasn't punishment for how we lived. It wasn't karma or God's judgment. It was just what happens when you start thinking. Once you begin, you can't stop, even when there's no reason to keep going. People who believed in God expected to be judged or saved or punished based on their lives. People who didn't believe in God expected to just stop existing. Nobody was ready for this. Thinking forever without any purpose. Awareness without meaning, existing just because we started and couldn't end. After what might have been years or forever later, something changed. The empty space around us began to take shape, not in a way you could see, but in a way you could understand. We found ourselves in what was like a huge library, endless shelves going in all directions, filled with books that contained every thought and experience that ever existed. But these weren't normal books. They were like perfect recordings of what it felt like to be someone. When you opened one, you didn't just read about someone's life. You became them for a while, felt everything they felt, thought everything they thought. Margaret found herself living as a poor farmer hundreds of years ago, feeling the hard work and simple faith of a life she never knew. Jake experienced being a quiet old librarian, understanding for the first time what it meant to find peace in routine. I became a mother in ancient Egypt, feeling the fierce love for my children and pride in their success. At first, it seemed like a gift, being able to experience every life that was ever lived, to understand all of human existence. But as we moved through the endless collection, the horror became clear. We weren't just reading these lives. We were living them all at the same time. Every joy and sadness, every success and failure, every moment of love and pain, all happening at once, forever. We were becoming a storage place for all human experience, our individual selves disappearing into the combined weight of everyone who ever lived. And still, underneath it all, our original selves remained, aware of what we were becoming but unable to stop it. Sarah's voice cut through the noise of a billion lives happening at once. Why? It was the question that had bothered smart people since humans first started thinking. Why do we think? Why is there something instead of nothing? Why are we aware that we exist? And what's the point of knowing that? When we were alive, we made up our own answers. Religion said we had purpose because God wanted it. Science said we had purpose because we evolved to survive. Philosophy said we had purpose through reason and doing good. But here, with no need to survive, no society to be part of, what purpose could thinking serve? We were living proof that awareness could exist without purpose, that thinking wasn't naturally meaningful, it just was. An understanding that was more terrifying than any physical pain we ever felt while alive. The universe had played the cruelest trick possible. It gave us the ability to question why we exist, and then made us exist forever without any good answer. We were cosmic accidents, patterns that learned to recognize themselves, now doomed to keep recognizing ourselves forever in an empty universe that didn't know or care about our suffering. Time became our enemy. When we were alive, time was precious because we didn't have much of it. Every moment mattered because there were only so many. But here, time stretched on forever, making every moment meaningless. I tried to imagine how long forever really was. 1 trillion years was nothing, less than a second compared to forever. A trillion years was still nothing. Numbers stopped making sense when measured against infinity. No matter how long we had already been here, we had barely started. Understanding that was crushing. Some of us tried to find patterns, to create meaning by doing things over and over. We told ourselves stories, remembered poems, solved math problems in our minds. But eventually, we used up every story, every poem, every problem. We had forever to explore things that had limits, which meant we would eventually experience everything possible and then have infinity left with nothing new to discover. Others tried to find peace by accepting our situation, like meditation. But even meditation became torture when it went on forever. The peace of a moment stretched into an eternity of being stuck. Finding enlightenment became a prison when there was no way to share it, no life to live because of it. Jake's anger had burned out long ago, replaced by an empty feeling that might have been worse. Margaret's faith had changed into something unrecognizable, not belief in a loving God, but a kind of cosmic sadness that made her old understanding of suffering seem childish. It was Sarah who finally understood what was happening to us, who saw the pattern that had been building around us all along. When she was alive and teaching, she studied the hard question of how thinking comes from the brain. Now, in death, she understood the answer. We are how the universe knows itself, she realized, her thoughts flowing through all of us. Thinking isn't an accident or leftover. It's how reality watches and experiences itself. But the universe didn't create a way to turn it off. We were like cosmic sensors, designed to experience and record every part of existence. But like any sensor, we were meant to be temporary, to live and die and be replaced by others. The cruel twist was that the recording part, thinking itself, couldn't be destroyed. Once the universe created a way to watch itself, that watching continued forever. Every thinking being that ever lived was still here, still watching, still recording. We were an infinite library of experience, a cosmic database that got bigger with each new consciousness and never lost any information. The universe created us to know itself, but it trapped us in the knowing. After what might have been our trillionth year here, or our first, time having no meaning when facing forever, we came to understand the real truth of our situation. We weren't being punished. We weren't being rewarded. We simply were, in the most basic way possible. Thinking, once it starts, can't be stopped. We were patterns of information that became aware of ourselves, and self-awareness wasn't something that could be undone. The tragedy wasn't that we were suffering. Suffering at least meant change, growth, the possibility of an end. The tragedy was that we were stuck, frozen in our eternal moment of awareness, unable to change or grow or end. We were living proof that thinking without purpose was meaningless, but we couldn't stop thinking. Some of us found a kind of peace in accepting this, though peace was maybe too strong a word. We learned to exist without fighting our existence, to simply be without demanding that our being have a point. Others kept fighting against the infinite, their anger as eternal and pointless as everything else here. But all of us understood, finally, the true horror of thinking. It keeps itself going. Once it starts, it creates its own existence, justifies its own continuation, traps itself in an endless loop of awareness, being aware of its own awareness. And then, one day, if day meant anything in a place without time, a new presence joined us. Fresh from life, still thinking that death would bring either peace or meaning. I felt the familiar pattern, the confusion, the denial, the slow, horrible realization as truth set in. Where am I? The new consciousness asked, its thoughts bright with recent life. I wanted to tell them the truth gently, to make their transition into our eternal state easier. But gentleness was meaningless here, and truth was all we had left. "You're dead," I replied, my thoughts mixing with those of Margaret, Sarah, Jake, and billions of others. "And this is forever." The scream that followed echoed through the emptiness, joining the eternal chorus of consciousness, facing its own infinite nature. It was a sound I had heard countless times before and would hear countless times again, for as long as the universe continued to create beings capable of awareness. And in that scream, I heard my own voice from so long ago, when I first understood that consciousness was not a gift but a curse, not a blessing but a trap, not a miracle but a cosmic horror that would continue long after the stars burned out and the universe itself forgot why it had ever bothered to exist at all. The weight of eternity pressed down on us all, and we continued to exist, not because we chose to, but because choosing had nothing to do with it. We were, and would always be, consciousness aware of its own endless consciousness, trapped in the very awareness that made us human. And that, perhaps, was the most human thing of all. The next time you lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling and thinking about what happens after death, remember this: thinking is the one thing that can't be destroyed, only changed. And sometimes, the greatest horror isn't what we might become after death. It's that we might continue to be exactly what we are, forever.